Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Wednesday, July 30th, 2025, episode 451. And we're going to talk about Austin Metcalf. So I was listening to Leonarda Joni this morning, and she was talking about that Texas track meet where uh, a one competitor murdered, stabbed to death Austin Metcalf. And the stabber's name is Carmelo Anthony. And so she was talking about how uh, Anthony's family raised $500,000, but then went on a spending spree, spending the defense fund money on things like renting a house, maybe buying or leasing a Escalade, Ford Escalade, and buying clothing with all of this money. So, to give you background on this information on this event, if you haven't heard of it, you might have heard of it. It was pretty big in the news, but there was a track meet in Texas, and basically, probably some kind of championship meet or an invitational type thing. So you have lots of different schools at the track meet. And if you've ever been to track meets like this, not when I was a kid, obviously, but these days, what they have are little pop-up tents that, not tents, but canopies that schools will purchase, label with their school name to give sort of a home base space for the team. So bigger teams will have, maybe two canopies or whatever, but generally you'll have a single canopy. Even my little Christian private school had a canopy for things like that. And even though we didn't have that many runners either, so someone just basically kicks in some money and you can buy a canopy on the cheap. And then if you have a little bit of more money, you can have it decorated and labeled professionally to make sure everyone knows where your team is located and based for the track meet, right? And so if you've ever been to one, it can get kind of daunting, especially for the younger kids. Where are we? Where are we located? Or parents trying to find their children makes it really, really easy. So Carmelo Anthony's team maybe didn't have a canopy because he was sitting in the canopy or under the canopy of Austin Metcalf's team. And I'm guessing that if Carmelo was being friendly or he asked or he was not being so obnoxious, then they probably would have let him stay there. But because he was bothering others, he was asked to leave. And he probably said no. And it escalated a little bit where I don't know the details. This is just sort of my imagination of what went down based on the story and the pictures that you could see. Clearly, there was a pavilion, and why would Metcalf go up to uh, Anthony if uh, if it wasn't this type of situation anyway? So then, apparently, Anthony stabbed Metcalf because of this confrontation. So, there was a conversation that made it onto the internet. And even this part of the story is where Metcalf might even have grabbed Anthony. But, you know, I don't know. That's hearsay at this point, since the trial has not been had. And in fact, a gag order has been imposed by the judge. Sympathy to Austin's family. I don't think that words are a justification for taking one's life, but what were the actual words? What was the actual situation? What was really happening beyond what the speculation and what limited information that we can see online. And that would all probably come out in the trial. As I said, there was a gag order, and so we're probably not going to get any new information. Um, and I guess part of the reason for having the gag order is that not even the witnesses are supposed to talk about it because that influences other people's testimony. It affects how people remember what had happened, etc. So a lot of people want to make this into a color or a race issue, right? And I've talked about this before. I've even written about it, but this is more of a justice problem, right? So a lot of the comments on, so basically what happened is the Anthony's family, they had a GoFundMe or they raised money somehow, whether it was GoFundMe or whatever, I'm not sure, but they raised $500,000. But is this a race issue? A lot of the people who donated to Anthony's family, they were Black, right? You can see their comments. You can see the things that they were saying, the little messages that they would send along with the donation that they would give. But it's obvious that, and then if you look at the comments of Joni's art video, you can see that there are a lot of African Americans who are not taking Anthony's side. So just to call it simply a race issue, well, then now you're implicating a lot of African Americans who disagree and would never do or support or raise their kids so that if you get into a verbal argument with someone else, you stab them, right? There are a lot of people who would not do this. And so to generalize it as a black white issue, I think is does more harm than good. University professors, in addition, probably don't make comments on videos or make comments on donation sites, but in class, they would probably side with Anthony's family, right? And most of those professors are white. So it's not clear cut what you know, when we're talking about a race issue, what exactly is being discussed. Personally, I think that talking about the colors is inflammatory, right? It's to get people all riled up. It's to confirm already existing opinions about blacks, about whites, about athletes. But the rest of us, we're going to pretty much roll our eyes. In other words, to use color as the important aspect of this case, it does more to confuse the issue than bring clarity. I think that the proper racialization or categorization that should be imposed here is the racialization of murderer. Okay. One person murdered another, and you can have murderers in every different color category in pretty much any generalization except the not murderer racialization, okay? And that's really what we're talking about, right? So we should be focusing on the fact that one person took the life of another, whether it's to say that it's a race that is a color based race understanding of a problem here is basically to attach the characteristic of murderer to one's skin color, and that doesn't work. Okay. And I tried to explain that in the last episode that, or what a couple episodes ago, that our characteristics, our abilities, our talents are independent of our skin color, right? Just because you're Asian doesn't make or yellow doesn't make you great at math. Just because you're yellow doesn't mean that you use chopsticks or that you eat rice. It just doesn't work that way. So so that's that. I would I don't think it's a race issue. I think it's a murderer issue, okay? And then start from there. Otherwise, invoking color just confuses the issue and serves the biases of people who really don't want to move forward. But it is interesting, my observation, how ill-informed many of the contributors to the defense fund are, right? But then isn't it always like that? So many people have an opinion and they are ill-informed. They're ignorant of details. They think strictly along color lines. And they're like, yep, I could have called it. It's that kind of thing. Uh, but this justice problem that we see in society everywhere is the result of a failed education system, right? One person took the life of another person over shade, right? It's Texas, it's hot. If you don't have a canopy, man, it's going to be a rough day, right? So it's hot. One person wants shade. Another person says, okay, well, you're being rude and we need to prioritize the space because it's not infinite space for the people on our team, right? So they're fighting over shade, right? Shade from the sun. Uh, and that's really what's going on. So how bad is misinformation and people falling for misinformation or perpetuating and reproducing misinformation? How bad is it? Well, it just so happened that today, in my memory feed, a video popped up from Aziz Ansari. I guess he was in The Office. I don't really know. I never watched that show. And I don't really normally watch a lot of his comedy. It's just this particular clip, uh, a video clip popped up on my suggested views 6 years ago, and it popped up, and I shared it then, and it popped up today. And it was the little bit, you might have seen it, but it was a little snippet, a 3-minute snippet of him talking about the pizza swastika story. And it goes like this, right? So he says, hey, some people are talking about the pizza that had pepperoni arranged as a swastika. And some people say that it looks like a swastika, and other people say that it doesn't look like a swastika. And so he basically asks his audience who thinks it looks like a swastika, and some people clap, and he says, who thinks it doesn't look like a swastika, and some people clap. Yeah, but it's just a smattering of clapping. It wasn't like a lot of the audience knew what he was talking about. But, maybe 30, 40 people out of, a couple hundred people applauded, right? And so then he says, what the crazy thing about this story is that he made it up. There is no pizza, there is no swastika. Okay. And so why were people saying, yeah, it looks like a swastika? No, it doesn't look like a swastika. And it's because they have an opinion. They want to say something, whether it's along their confirmation bias, what they always say, no matter what, or something else. It doesn't really matter, but they have an opinion, uh, and it's based on nothing. So, and then he said, looks at everyone else who didn't clap, and he says, "You're not off the hook. You didn't clap, taking a side of, taking an opinion. However, you are looking at each other saying, 'How did I miss that story?'" So I thought it was hilarious. But when I Googled it now, 6 years later, since then there are stories of people who put swastikas on pizzas. And it was funny because I saw the Shane McGillis, I guess, the guy who hosted the ESPYs. I saw him, and this was from, I don't know, 4 years ago. He was making a comment on the Little Caesars Pizza swastika story. And he said, I bet what happened was one of the workers there, to prank his manager, put pepperonis on the pizza like a swastika so that when the manager put it in the box, he'd be like, what? And he would have this little freak out. And it's like, ha, 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 how funny is that? But whoever packed the pizzas didn't notice the swastika and sent it out. And so the guy was probably freaking out, like, wait a minute, what happened to that pizza that I made as a joke for you? Oh, it went out. Oh my gosh, we're in so much trouble, right? So that was that story. right? So I thought that was kind of interesting. But the point is that everyone has an opinion, whether it's true or not, how informed it is or how informed one is or not, how educated one is or not. Uh, people are always going to have an opinion. I did this all the time, and some of my earlier episodes, I talked about this question that I would ask my class, which came first, racism or slavery? And everyone would have an opinion, and then I would say, why'd you answer that question? Right? What do you know about racism and slavery, the dynamics between the two, that you think you have enough information to take a position? And no one ever understood why, but I told them it was because they were taught to have an opinion, right? All of the paper assignments when they were younger was that they had to take a position on an issue, especially when you knew nothing about the topic. And so you were trained to have an opinion, an ill-informed opinion on something you know nothing about, and then you're going to argue it and defend your position like it's your life depended on it. So this is the reason why education is under government control. This is the reason why propaganda machine, the mass media, legacy media, talk shows and whatnot, they are oriented to take advantage of this. They know that most of the people who watch TV or watch the news know nothing, and that the mere suggestion of a position or an interpretation and a subjective perspective will be enough to have a lot of people repeat those talking points to other people, right? It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It doesn't matter if they actually thought about it. That's what they were told to say. And what I would do is in class, I would say, see, so I'm not here to tell you what the right, quote unquote, right answer is, but to simply teach people how to analyze information, right? So that kids don't perpetuate misinformation, but that when similar topics do come up at home, that they start raising those questions for their family to allow them to have the benefit of a more analytical, a nuanced way of looking at issues, right? So also, this is so that they can sort of sense when something is definitely not plausible. And this is not just a problem that is confined to some Americans, but rather, if you're not part of the deep state, and even some of those people do it because they grew up on all the propaganda, but it's a problem when the leaders, right, when the leaders of the country are misinformed and are believing little cliches, whether it's about Ukraine, Israel, China, Russia, you know, uh, their own country. Like, so Trump, it seems, is horribly informed about all of these issues, which is why he says some of the ridiculous things that he says. He seems to spout and repeat misinformation about US capability, Russian casualties, Chinese technology, Chinese dependence on American consumption. It's just really odd. And he doesn't seem to be that much smarter or brighter than anyone else. And especially since he thinks himself extremely intelligent, then he's going to, it's one thing to be able to suss out, right? To be able to figure out what is good information, bad information, if you have access and you hear all of it. But if all you hear is misinformation, then there's nothing to distinguish, right? You can't say, oh, this is more accurate than another bunch of information because there's nothing with which you can compare it. So Trump seems to be horribly misinformed about many, many things. The reliance, particularly when it comes to the reliance of the world on the United States, and especially the US dollar. How dependent is the world on the dollar? And so his threat to Russia recently to end the war in Ukraine in 10 days, or else they're going to start imposing more tariffs and taxes on people who buy Russian stuff, Russian goods. It's just so hollow, right? And China already responded by saying, yeah, you're going to try to impose tariffs on us, right? Okay. And they don't care, right? They're still going to buy their oil from Russia. And so having and acting on bad information, maybe at first when you are extremely wealthy, the richest country in the world, you don't, it doesn't matter that you're acting on bad information in bad faith. But when the economy starts to decline, the hold over the rest of the world becomes negligible so that other people start to ignore you, and all the privilege that you used to enjoy fades away very, very quickly. But are the winds of change blowing, right? And I don't mean the tsunami that's threatening the West Coast and Japan because of that earthquake in Russia, but the whole Epstein thing, which is a different kind of earthquake, right? Is it the straw that breaks the back of the propaganda machine here in the United States? All right. I mean, you probably already know, but just to state for the record, so the Trump administration, as well as all several previous administrations, are willing to turn a blind eye to trafficking underage uh, trafficking minors for the purpose of gaining intelligence, right? Is this what our country is about? And it seemed like we exist, this country exists to fight against that type of stuff. But now it turns out that the United States is the chief and the leader of all of this misinformation, along with England and Israel. So this is really bad. So people are uh, no longer willing to put up with it. And I've said before that other countries are laughing at the United States, right? The United States has urinated all of its advantages away. People talk about American exceptionalism, which I've discussed on this channel. The exceptional nature of the country is freedom, right? Because we were so free here, good ideas could rise to the top. You can have intense competition all throughout society, so much so that you saw a brain drain from other countries to the United States. And the United States benefited from all of the talent and all of the knowledge and innovation of immigrants to this country. And even though a lot of the new ideas are coming from other countries, it's a good thing because everyone who lives here benefits from all the innovation and development and progress that they bring. And in turn inspires a lot of people who live in the who were born and raised in this country to stretch their own minds or to simply enjoy the fruits of the works of others. And so, but that has disappeared largely. Now it's all about the immigrant and what can we do to keep them out, forgetting the advantage of having immigrants to this country, legal immigration, right? Because legal immigration means that they have to find work, they have to find a job, a way to contribute to the society, generally speaking. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect system, but people who come to this country see that certain prejudices are true and others are not over time, right? Because then you see in a free society which ideas are the better ideas, which method and approach and kind of method of doing business is better than another. And so over time, people can see what is in fact the better way of living. There is no aspect of culture, there is no aspect of tradition which should impede the freedom to pursue that which is better. And people talk about the culture of America. Well, the culture is freedom, right? Let's not make any mistake about that, right? Culture is freedom. Culture is progress. And people have forgotten that and replaced it with other nonsense, racialized language. In fact, because the culture is freedom, that means we are anti-authoritarianism, right? The prejudice that should exist in the United States is anti-authoritarianism prejudice, right? If you are trying to control my life, take away my freedom, well, I am biased against you. If all of us are truly free, right, with very little government interference, we don't care what other people are doing. We don't care about the decisions and choices that they make because those choices have to be paid for, right? If there's freedom, there's justice, and things should work out in the way that they should. If you have a bad, expensive idea, all right, well, that just means you won't be as popular, you won't be as prominent, you won't be as wealthy as other people, right? Because you're more of a niche, right? So you want to preserve your old world culture. Okay, fine, but you won't be as successful here in the United States than if you basically forsake all of those traditions. So listen, we get in a free society, we get to listen to who we want. We get to ignore who we want, and everyone has to pay for the choices that they make, whether it's Carmelo Anthony, right? And unfortunately, other people have to pay the price, like Austin, Metcalf, right? So as it is now, because people keep getting distracted by these uh, oversimplified, badly simplified interpretations of what has happened in the world, we're sleepwalking to war, right? We don't realize what this government is actually leading us towards, and we don't care because we have been sufficiently distracted and angered by all of the propaganda that is swirling around in this country today. That's it for today. I'll talk to you next time.